Hello and welcome. My name is Vicky Washay, and this is a Wealthy Life podcast where we talk about all things mindset, finances, and property investment, helping you understand how you can leverage your resources so that you can create the life that you want. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to you about why tenants who get a very bad rep should actually be treated like a client, someone that you recognize, someone that you create your product or your service for very specifically, and someone that you value and want to have a long-term relationship with. And like any business, your clients are where you make your money. And that's what we really need to do. We need to change, if you like, the narrative around property investment, and that not only are landlords bad, but tenants are bad as well. No, they're not. They're, for the most part, very decent human beings who simply want somewhere to live. And because of the way society works and maybe their financial position, they can't afford to buy a house for themselves. Now, back in the day, none of this was seen as a bad thing. Everybody was a tenant back in the day. Very few people owned their own homes. And we're shifting towards a society where if you don't own your own home, you're some sort of lesser being. That's absolutely not true. These are decent people, sometimes working, sometimes not, sometimes single parents, sometimes not. And all they want is somewhere to be safe, be warm, and bring up their families. And I can speak from experience because I too have been a social tenant, a social housing tenant. So let's start a relationship based on mutual respect. And in this episode, I'm going to take you through 5 things that you can do so that you can really identify the right client to be working with and provide them with the right product so that you have a long and fruitful mutual relationship. I hope you enjoy. So we're talking about tenants this week, and last week I talked about how you can lose a lot of money investing in property. And if you think about that, although I covered everything, it was really, if you think about the property, the deal itself, but you could also lose a lot of money if you don't make the right decisions about getting the right tenant for you. So let's break this down and start thinking of you're investing in property and this is going to be a business for you. So who is your client? Well, your client is very obviously your tenant. So do you understand them? And do you know what it is that they're looking for in a property? And is that something, and I'm going to couch it as you can afford to, can you afford to offer them that service? And I'll just give you an example there. If what you're looking to do is provide decent homes for decent families, so you're looking to do family lets, there's a difference between buying a property that costs between 100 and 150,000 pounds in the north to buying a property that is 450 to 650 in the south. And they'll both be 3-bedroom properties. Yes, the rent that you will get in the north will be less than the rent that you'll get in the south, but the rent that you get in the south, your return will be lower because the property price is so higher. And so what you've really got to understand is, do you have enough money to pay the deposits, to pay the refurbs, and to get what is really quite a low return on investment because you're going to go for properties that are close to you? Or can you put in place a system where you can afford the risk and the money to go slightly wider in the country, slightly further away from home, and get a more affordable property at a more affordable rent for your tenants that ends up generating a better rate of return for you? And that's really, I suppose that's the essence of what I do when I help my clients is look at that bigger picture. So let's get into this idea of tenants as a client. And I think I've mentioned already that both landlords get a bad rep, we're evil, we're nasty, and tenants get a bad rep. Those are TV programs. And the reason that they come out in a series of maybe 6 to 10 episodes is because they found 30 people in the UK in that year that they can do a story on. There are millions of both private landlords and private tenants. And if they were the landlords that bad or the clients that bad, don't you think there would be a channel devoted to them? If they could do back-to-back dreadful tenants and dreadful landlords programs, they would be, because it's that sort of car crash TV that we all love to see. We love to see, bizarrely, because that's the sort of people we are in this country, people fail. So a landlord who's gone out there and bought a property trying to make money off of poor people fail for some reason and prove that he was bad, or a landlord fail because the tenant didn't pay the rent or damaged the property in some way. You know, we love that sort of car crash TV, but it's not on 24/7 because it's not the reality. So let's look at what the reality is. So number one, I don't know whether to call this a product or a service, but you are selling a product or a service. So the product is a 3-bedroom house. A service is a decent home for you to live in. And it really depends on the nature of what your technique is as to whether it will be a product or a service. I would say that serviced accommodation is very obviously a service because you're providing somewhere short stay and has cleaning services and, you know, teas and coffees in the kitchen. If you're looking at a 3-bedroom house that is a family home for a long-term rent, then maybe that's a product. What you've got to understand here is, who is your client? Who are you looking to be your tenant? And are they the right client for you? Can you afford to provide the level of product or service for the specific tenant that you want to attract? So I've given you an example of a family let. The difference between buying in the north and buying in the south is very obviously the purchase price of the property. But with that comes 25% of that cost is going to have to be your cash investment. So if we say £100 property in the north, so £100,000 property in the north, you're looking at a £25,000 deposit. And if we say £400,000 in the south, you'll be lucky, then you're looking at 100,000. You could get 4 houses in the north for the cost of one in the south. And yes, it might be a lot further away from you, and that will bring with it its own risks, challenges, systems that you have to put in place, but it's very doable. Nearly all of my clients are south-based. A lot of them live abroad, and yet I help them invest in the northwest because I have the system there to make the business simple and manageable, even at arm's length. And they are very much involved. It's not hands off, it's arm's length through the systems that we use. So understanding the type of product or service that you're offering. For example, if you want to rent properties, we call them professionals or young professionals, but basically young people, whether they're students at university or young people before they're in fully committed relationships, working and wanting to live in a shared house. Now, whether that's an old-fashioned HMO where they're sharing bathrooms, or whether it's the new fancy co-living environments, which are a higher standard, which is the sort of work that we always did probably 10 years ago now. Whatever it is, that is going to require more of your time. Why? Because you've got more rooms in one unit, and because the expectation is that the tenant will not stay that long. And then when you take a house that is not purpose-built, that might be an original 3-bedroom and you put 4 people in, or it's a 4-bed and you put 5 in, or it's a 6-bed and you put 7 or 8 in, whatever it is, you're putting more people, more strangers, remember as well, into one space. Then what you're looking at is greater wear and tear. And with that comes the higher need for maintenance. It also comes with risks. How can more people in a house mean more risk? Well, because they're strangers. So understanding, well, hopefully there's no smoking in your HMOs, but if somebody had smoked in their bedroom and had left a cigarette smouldering somewhere and it created a fire, those were the old risks. Now you've got technology overheating, you not having enough sockets in a bedroom, so they're using extension leads, you not managing the heating or the insulation of the property, so they bring in their own heaters. So imagine, those little portable heaters that blow out hot air, how dangerous they are and how easy they can catch fire. And that's without even considering the risks that come with the kitchen and with cooking. So risks then come with systems that you need to put in place. And of course, fire alarms and fire alarm checks and all of that sort of thing. Then think about serviced accommodation. Again, more of your time. Why? Because we're really only expecting the people to stay a matter of days, never mind a matter of months. And now you've got check in, check out, cleaning, making sure that this property is hotel immaculate. And depending on some of the hotels you've been, more than hotel immaculate, literally on a twice a week basis. So you've got people coming in at the weekend. That place needs to be immaculate midweek. That place needs to be immaculate again the following weekend. So dirty marks, spills on the floor, damage to bed sheets and things like that. So everything requires your attention. And of course, the new contractor houses, which is basically contractors living midweek in what was effectively an HMO. So do you have the money and the time to operate at the right level of service and product for the client that you want to attract? And I think you really need to be honest here. Now, I suppose I do have the time. I just don't want to spend the time to manage an HMO or a serviced accommodation or a contractor housing. In honestly, I don't even want to manage my own simple buy-to-lets. So I will use a letting agent. Now, a letting agent will work on a buy-to-let. There are very few letting agents that work with HMOs or do it well enough. There are specialist people that you can go to. And I interviewed Lisa way back, maybe 20 odd episodes ago. So go back and look at the episodes that I did with Lisa, because that's sort of the service that she offers. But again, that's going to be very location specific. And yes, you could get a cleaner in, you could maybe have a handyman, you could have a lockbox on the door for your serviced accommodation, but you're still going to have to pay attention to it. And if you outsource these services, there are costs. Some people will self-manage their buy-to-lets just to save 10% from the letting agent. You're not going to get just a charge of 10% on serviced accommodation. And remember, you've got all the marketing costs on top of this. So really understanding the product or service that you are offering, that it is right for your client and that it is right for you. That's number one. Get that wrong, and like I was talking about last week, that can cost you money, but more importantly, it'll cost you headache and heartache. But get it right. Treat these tenants like a client and deliver the best possible service for them, and you will have a property business that will reap the benefits for you. So let's look at another reason. So you understand who it is that you're targeting, and you've checked that there's a demand. That's really important. Why should they pick your property? So let's look at two things here. Demand. So you want to know that there are plenty of people out there, families, for example, looking for 3-bed houses. Or let's say, for example, you've got an opportunity to buy a 4-bedroom property. Do you understand the implications that come with a 4-bed versus a 3-bed? Because obviously the rent is going to increase, and that will actually change the nature of that family. That is not your typical mum and dad with 2 or 3 kids. That is a larger family. And are you prepared for their needs, which will differ? So, for example, we had some tenants and they had 3 children, but one of those children was on the spectrum and so required their own room. And that worked perfectly in a 4-bedroom property because there was mum and dad, the 2 other kids got their room, and the child that needed its own space so it could control its own environment and have that place to retreat to had their space as well. But what happened there was that they had benefits on top of their income to provide the care for that child that had the spectrum needs. And so that meant that they could afford a higher rent. So you've really got to look at that. It could be that your family has a disabled child. So it's not just about the number of bedrooms, it's actually about accessibility. So have you provided that? It's a very specific niche that you might want to look at, but only if there is a demand. If there's no demand for this sort of tenancy, then there's no point paying the money to provide a product that nobody is going to rent or could afford to rent. So understanding the demand in the area. Now, a big example of demand is HMOs. So back in, I'm going to say the 2010s, let's say 2012-ish through to about 2018, in the early days of them announcing Crossrail, and now called Elizabeth Line, there was so much feverish investment into Reading and a bit further down Swindon, Maidenhead, all those sorts of areas, because they were going to be on the stops for the new Elizabeth Line. And so a lot of people perceived that we would have people move out of London, be able to rent properties in these areas fairly close to the station, and then commute easily into London. And that is true. I didn't see the point of it myself to start, but actually the trip into London is a breeze on the Elizabeth Line. So the prices of houses that could be converted into HMOs in the Reading area went from, I think, in the region of 2,500, I'll say, in early 2012, up to 4,500 within a couple of years. Not only did the price of the unit cost change, but of course you've got all the refurbishment costs on top of that. But then what you ended up with was a glut of bedrooms in the area. So instead of the bedrooms being at a certain rent, because there were so many bedrooms available or rooms available, you've got over demand, or sort of oversupply and less demand, and so you end up in a position where the price falls. I've seen this time and time again. It's happened in university towns. When we originally invested over in Lincoln, we were getting £120 per room, and then all of a sudden those prices dropped down to £90 per room per week. Why? Because there were so many HMOs in the area, and now they put a ceiling on it. You can't invest in Lincoln because it's become an Article 4 area. And that's a sure sign that there has been a shift in the balance of property types in an area. When it becomes an Article 4 area, that's the council saying, enough. There are too many people renting by the room, because it changes the nature of the building, changes the nature of the community, and you need to be aware of that. So you understand who you're targeting and you understand about the demand, and there is demand there, but why should they pick your property over my property, or my property over your property? How can you make the product or the service that you are offering the best fit for their purpose? You really need to get in their heads. And if you are slightly older, trying to get in the head of a young person may be more of a challenge. You know, if you're in your late 40s, early 50s or older, do you really understand what young people need in the way of shared accommodation? Do they care whether they have their own shower or not? I do, but does that matter to your client? What about sockets? I mentioned that in a previous podcast. If you don't have enough sockets in the room, if you don't have a best possible Wi-Fi, you've got all of these people in a shared house. You might have, let's say, 5 tenants. You've seen the adverts on the TV. All 5 of them are watching a different movie on their different devices. But young people don't just watch a movie. They're watching a movie while probably typing a report and answering friends on WhatsApp. They'll have 3 devices in their room. That's 15 devices in a 5-bed house. Can your Wi-Fi stand that? And if it can't, how long before your tenant gets irritated with the poor quality of the Wi-Fi or the bathroom facilities or the fact that there isn't enough fridge space or cupboard space in the kitchen and move on? And that turnover is going to make you miserable. Now, that can apply to houses as well. If you're not aware of what the family needs in a family home, do they feel safe? Is there a good school nearby? Have they got access to public transport? What about parking their family car? If you don't provide something that is fit for purpose, they're not going to pick you. And if they do pick you, they'll move on. Remember, every time a tenant moves out, whether it's in an HMO or in a full house, there's going to be some level of refurbishment costs, bringing that property back up to a good standard so that you are the first choice for the next tenant. Those are all costs that are adding to your own overheads. So getting that right first time is so important. That's why you need to treat your tenant like a client. So let's look at number 3 then. So you want to make this easy to manage and easy to rent. It needs to be easy to manage for you, because part of the reason you're investing in property is not just to make your money work harder, but to also free up your own time so that you can be in a position where you can live the life that you want to live. So that's why it needs to be easy to manage for you. And it needs to be easy to rent. You don't want to put obstacles in the way of your tenants, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're putting in place all the checks, because you want to attract the right tenant. And by that, you mean the tenant who wants to live in your house, but the tenant who can afford to live in your house, the tenant that will treat your house with respect and not damage it, and will take care of it and will report repairs. And so those two things have to come together. A system that is easy for you to use, easy for the tenant to use, but at the same time, as not putting obstacles in either of your way, actually has clear processes, checks and balances to make sure that they have the right to rent, that they can afford the property, that you've got the references, that all the prescribed paperwork has been delivered there on the day and you can prove it. Obviously, do this through your letting agent. It's a much better use of your time, but you need to know that those systems are in place for you and that that your letting agent is working to get the right tenants for you, working with you to build the best possible, if you like, I don't want to say easiest business to run, but that is actually what we're looking for. We're looking to make our business as easy to run as possible. But it isn't just easy, but it could be as easy as possible. So let's look at number 4. Now your tenant has moved in, your client lives in your property. How can you make sure that they remain happy? So many things need to go on during the process of a tenancy. There's going to be things like the 6-month inspection. So this is making sure that the property stays up to standard. If you're doing HMOs or serviced accommodation or contractor houses, you will want to do this more frequently. But if you've got a family that is moving into a 3-bedroom house, then a simple 6-month inspection should be sufficient. How do you respond to the repairs? They need to be timely and professionally handled. The number of times I buy properties where the outgoing landlord has done the work themselves. We saw an amazing property the other day that was split into 3 flats, but the opportunity just wasn't right when we got round there. It was in the perfect location. The clients would have been a dream. It was going to be a great deal on paperwork until I spoke to the vendor, the landlord, and found out that he had done the work himself. He'd done the rewire, he'd done the replumb, he'd done the decorating. He'd put the boiler in. Well, what qualifications did he have for this? None of that could be trusted. Not only trusted that it was legal and safe, but none of it could be trusted to last the next 5 years. And one of the things that you need to do is to make sure that your property is safe. So you're going to have a gas certificate and electrical certificates that need to be taken care of. And you need to make sure that you are in a position where you're giving timely notice to the tenants so that you can come round and carry out these essential safety works. So let's have one more conversation here about the value add. So for some investments, what we're looking at is how we can add value to the property. And of course, a very popular one right now would be looking at any sort of environmental consideration. Why? Because on a simple house and for a family, what you're looking to do is reduce the bills. So there is legislation in place around EPCs, energy performance certificates, and there's going to be changes coming down the line. Basically, you need to make sure that your property is a minimum of a C, a solid C. And that means that what you've done is you've checked the loft insulation, you've got cavity wall insulation, you've made sure that you've got double glazing. And let's be honest, I've seen properties even in 2024 that don't have double glazing. That you are looking at the light bulbs that you use, the quality, the age, and the performance of the boiler, that you've got thermostats in the room so that it's not a case of if I get too hot, I open the window, that I can adjust each individual radiator. And that is so important in HMOs. You've got 5 strangers living in an HMO. One of them, if I was one of those, I don't have heating in my bedroom at all. So I would have my windows open permanently if I couldn't turn the radiator off. Every hotel room we go to, first thing we do is turn the radiator off. So you've really got to understand what's important to your tenant and then where the value adds are. The value adds for you and the value adds for them. So radiator thermostats work both ways. It allows your tenant to control the heat in their room or their house, and it allows you to control the heating costs, particularly if you're an HMO landlord. And of course, it's good for the environment. But you can make your property even more climate friendly by, for example, putting solar panels on the roof. But if you said that a set of solar panels with a single battery might cost you £10,000, plus or minus the schemes that are in your area, whether the roof is 2 stories high or 3 stories high, the size of the roof. So there's lots of variables in there. But if we just use the figure £10,000, who is that adding value to? Does that add value to a family that are renting the property? It could do. It could be saving them on their electricity bill. And if you work with them to understand the benefits of renting your property with solar panels, that could be a very good selling point and add value to your tenant. If your investment technique is HMOs, then actually any savings that you get through solar panels would be on your costs because you pay the bills as an HMO landlord. I think one of the places this really works for me is if when you're looking at your property in terms of its life cycle and you've decided this is one that you want to sell, maybe at that point putting solar panels on might be an appeal to new buyers down the line. But there is a cost and you've got to make sure that it's worth it. If we're talking about working in partnership with your client, another example looking at the HMO models is, for example, you could offer your tenants that if they carry out a professional clean at the end of the tenancy, they could win a pizza night. And then you give them some vouchers so that they can all have a pizza on their last night as they leave. Or maybe they can all order a pizza while they're doing the clean. What about if you've got a tenant leaving and you offer them the opportunity maybe of £100 Amazon voucher if they refer a friend who becomes qualified as a tenant? I remember when I first left home, the flat that I moved into was literally passed around work friends. So whoever was living there when they chose to move on, they let their mates know because everybody wanted to live in this property. It was a great location. It was a great price. It was a great layout. And so you got that into office, into friend referral. These are ways that you can save money by being nice and offering something of benefit to your tenant, to your client. So maybe if you can think of other things that you could offer your client, the benefits that you could offer them that would have a benefit for you, share your ideas, put that in the comments for these posts. The key point of this podcast is to change your thinking, to put a little bit of a whoosh in around what is a tenant? A tenant is a client. They are someone that you need to value. They do need to go through specific checks, and they do need to be treated in a certain way. They're not your friend. They have the right to inhabit the property, and you need to give notice, so don't get over friendly. But at the same time, if you understand them in this headspace and concept of client, then you can be making your product fit their needs rather than, and I've had this before where I've spoken to people, they're doing places up to their taste. And it's not about their taste. And that's the very first lesson my letting agent ever told me. We wanted to go up there and we wanted to put carpets down. And we were told, no, a lot of the tenants around here have dogs. They have the right to dogs. They don't want carpet if they've got pets. You're better off with either laminate or lino, preferably not lino, but some sort of washable flooring. What if they had children? We wanted to put up curtains. No, in our area, they like blinds. They like those vertical blinds. That's what they want. So it's not my taste. It's about making a product that is fit for my client. And I hope that I've been able to share that with you as I've talked through being clear who your client is and that you can afford to work for them. And knowing, of course, that there is a demand for the property that you are going to produce, putting in those places that are both easy for you and easy for your tenant, and making sure that at all times through your inspections and your certificates and the way that you speak to tenants, giving them plenty of notice before the term ends to think about whether they want to stay longer, giving them notice for gas certificates, etc. That whole inter-tenancy process is professional. And then looking at where there are opportunities to add value, to stand out from the crowd. Is it solar panels, or is it the way that you treat a tenant when they leave? Maybe there's a little welcome for when they arrive. That is something that you can often see in serviced accommodations, those little baskets. They used to do it a lot. It was called Airbnb, and people provided bed and breakfast. And then the breakfast bit drifted away because that's where there's a little bit of cost that can be saved, but some form of a welcome basket, maybe for a tenant, depending on the rent and the nature of the property and the nature of the client. Is that something that could differentiate you? Have a think. But above all, understand that a tenant is to be valued. That's how you make your money. Something worth thinking about. I'll see you next week. Please make sure to follow the links to the community, of course. Join a Wealthy Life community if you haven't done that. And of course, I'd love to hear your feedback. If you've got ideas on ways that we can offer tenants benefits that benefit us, that would be a great topic to have more of a discussion around. So please share your thoughts. Thank you very much. My name is Vicky Wishay. I will speak to you next week.